This is BBC Radio 2, that was Propaganda, and Jill with Paul Morley talking about the ZTT Box Set. 25 years since we started the label. When did the label begin to sort of fade out?
I worked for the label for about 2 or 3 years before I was found out, if you like, that I was having these ideas that were maybe not conducive to the kind of more conventional
So you all
label.
fell out, did you?
Fell out hugely. Oh, hugely. I mean, probably within the first week. I think when I delivered my first set of sleeves, there was some confusion about what the hell I was doing and how come no one had checked me.
Well, it sounds like you were taking the project serious, though.
I was taking it incredibly seriously because I thought it was really important, and I thought that the way that records were marketed should reflect some of the glamour and excitement of the music itself. And often records were marketed in a way that simply said "out now" or "available." It was just a cover. I wanted to bring in all sorts of advertising techniques and all sorts of ideas about information and everything, and really make the label full of life and full of attitude.
Yeah.
And I did get carried away. There's no doubt about it. And for a moment, I really thought it was my label, and I really thought everything. You know, it was obviously the hits were happening.
It's a Mancunian thing.
It's a Mancunian thing.
It is. Yeah.
The hits were happening because of Trevor's sound. They were just the best pop records. But there was maybe half of a percent.
Yeah.
But also the things I was adding to it. You know, the Frankie Say T-shirts, the stupid marketing, the getting everyone on top of the pops to always wave flags when Frankie were on, winding people up.
Yeah.
I think had a little contribution to it. I'd like to think so. Yeah.
I think if you look back over 25 years, the fact that we don't have ZTT and we don't have factory records, so there's something there is a void.
There's a void, and I find it fascinating. It's ZTT and Factory, absolutely, definitely, and other really influential early indie labels like Postcard. I mean, they came through a little bit with Alan McGee, with
Creation,
but a lot of it, I find staggering, hasn't been taken on in a world that is now apparently very indie. But the real idea of those independent labels in the early days, the early Rough Trade, the Richard Boone, Buzzcock's New Hormones, Factory Records, Fast, Postcard, Mute, Fetish. There was another label called Fetish, you know, with bands like 23 Skidoo on. It's very fascinating that it sort of didn't go anywhere.
Talking about, what, the ZTT represents, and we had that moment when we had the Hacienda, British dance music was about to take off, and I've said this on a number of occasions, that 808 State do not get the credit they so richly deserve, because no 808, no Chemical Brothers, and I don't think people realise, and I find it very strange they don't get the credit they so richly deserve.
Written into the history.
It will happen. I think it will happen.
Well, it will happen eventually, but in a funny sort of way, being on ZTT didn't help them in that end, I think. Because it kind of distracted people slightly, because, I mean, what had happened, it's funny to say that, because I went back to ZTT pretty much totally to try and sign 808 State.
Oh, did you? Right.
Because the label had gone a bit funny. We'd had a Frankie Goes to Hollywood court case. It had kind of collapsed. I'd gone away. I'd done other things. Still very, very connected to the label personally, because I put a lot of myself in it. And then that moment happened. I remember seeing 808 State very early on. I can't remember how or where, but they were on stage and they were playing live, but there were no instruments. There were turntables.
Yeah.
There was people dancing. I thought, wow, what an amazing image. That a pop group now doesn't look like a pop group at all. But it's playing live, but it's kind of playing records.
The record that you signed them with, the Pacific, which is a record I think I was aware of maybe 3 or 4 years before, maybe 3 years, I can't remember. Was it 2 or 3 years before it actually came out on a white label? Because Gerald was involved, a guy called Gerald was involved.
That's right.
And it came out, you tinkered with it, I think it lost a lot of its edge, but it was a big hit for them, wasn't it? It was top of the pops. And
it went straight into the charts. It was a pop record, and that was a wonderful moment, which again I think you're right in terms of them being underestimated. That a lot of the music at the time was obviously, fashionable and people knew of it, but it wasn't necessarily doing that thing that I think is important, which great new music gets on top of the pops. It gets in the charts. It has an audience. It changes things because of it.
Yeah.
And obviously, that whole Hacienda thing that happened when this kind of new kind of music was being imported from the sunny parts of the world and the Chicago parts of the world, fitting into a Manchester sense of itself. 808 State were as important, if not more important, than the obvious icons of the Happy Mondays and the Stone Roses.
No, I agree.
And 808 State, for me, it is, and it may be because they don't have they never had the singer, they never had the ear, and they never had the show.
Well, they're faceless, but you're a dance act.
But,
I mean, you order a faceless, in that manner. But
it is interesting that they are incredibly underestimated all along the way, and it was almost like they were too early for it to really be noticed as much as it should have been. And by the time they could have been noticed, they were so experimental, they'd kind of moved on a bit,
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Paul. We could talk for hours and hours. The ZTT Box Set is now, I don't know how many, 100 songs, maybe more, 50 tracks, 18 videos, 6 number 1 hits, top 20, 40 hits, 25 Trevor Horn productions. We go on and on.
It's a box set.
It's a box set of lots of stuff.
And I guess we always knew one day it would be in a box.
There you go. A fitting last line there. In a box, ZTT, this is Pacific from 808 State. Paul Morley, thank you for joining us.
Thanks a lot.